It's now about 48 hours since polls began closing across the country, and we still don't know who will be inaugurated on July 20th, January 20th. I hope it doesn't go that long. What we do have, though, is a lot of confusion, litigation, and I'm guessing, having seen the president speak just recently, some sleepless nights in both party headquarters. As things stand right now, the states of confusion, where things are either not declared or there's litigation going on, are Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, which is pretty much most of the swing states. Alaska also hasn't declared a winner yet, but the president will almost certainly get those 3 electoral votes. We're hoping to make some sense of all of this that's happening out there tonight. We will look at the question of election integrity. We'll look at how things are in the Senate and House as things stand, what the markets are making of all of this, and finally, we'll get the most up-to-date news on the various legal suits that have been filed, and that's definitely a moving target. Here to help us is Trey Grayson. He's a former Kentucky Secretary of State, a member of the newly formed National Council on Election Integrity, and Rob Richie. He's CEO and president of FairVote. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
So, election integrity, we just heard, I assume you all heard the president speak a short time ago, where he listed a number of concerns that he has. That there was kind of a long list about litigation that was in Pennsylvania about getting observers into the polling booths, and that was, went through, but then they were claiming they weren't allowed in. There was a pipe in Georgia that burst that was apparently far from the polling place, but they closed it anyway. Anyway, there was a whole list of things. Georgia's counting votes they shouldn't. Pennsylvania changed the law to allow voters to cure their mistaken ballots. All kinds of things listed by the president. So why don't we start with you, Secretary Grayson? Can you tell us where things are at in terms of the integrity of this election? What's been happening, what hasn't?
So I think in general, Cindy, there's a lot of integrity in this race. I mean, in this election and all the elections we've seen up and down the ballots. One of the things that's still happening right now, and the way we run our elections in America, is a lot of people vote in advance of Election Day. They vote early in person, they vote by mail, and those mail ballots just take longer to process. And so unfortunately, in a couple of the states, they added the ability for more people to vote by mail, but didn't add the ability for election administrators to process those ballots early enough. So that was been the problem in Pennsylvania, is they couldn't start even determining the eligibility of ballots until Election Day. And they have millions of ballots to go through all across the state. So what we're seeing is really a function of close races. There's still counting going on in all 50 states and the District of Columbia. Most states allow absentee ballots to come in late. It's just that we don't have big margins in these battleground states. And it's frustrating because either candidate could win with the right pattern of states. So my message to everybody is this counting is normal. Let it proceed. It's generally transparent. And to be honest, I haven't heard really anything that causes me to put into question what's going on right now. There's a time for courts and recounts and litigation and things like that. But right now, let's count everything, see where we stand, and then go into recount phase and litigation and election contest phase.
So when you say you haven't heard of anything, the cases that the president brings up, you haven't heard those personally, or you don't think there's merit to them, or you just think they're too sporadic to really, be anything of a problem?
I've heard of them. I'm not sure how strong the evidence is, and we'll go to court. Let the judges decide. We can get. That's what the post-election process usually is for, is to weigh those claims. We saw it in 2000. We see it when I was Secretary of State. We saw lawsuits. And we went to the courts, and Republicans sometimes won and Democrats sometimes won. But right now, let's just focus on the count. And these administrators are trying to do their job. And it's a fairly transparent process, and in some respects more transparent than ever before, because some states, certain localities are actually streaming the count. It's really boring, but it's really important.
I've seen some of those live cams, the polling places. And Rob, I want to ask you, well, first of all, do you have any input or a different view there from the Secretary?
No, I think that really captures it well. And, I think one of the things we should keep in mind is there's been a lot of, I guess, a certain kind of heroism of both voters and local election officials this year. It's a pandemic. It's a really challenging time in the country, and yet we're going to have a greater percentage of adult citizens vote than we've ever had in the United States. Since we've expanded suffrage to include women and more of our country. And in a really difficult time, and all of these right now, what's going on is local election officials are doing their job and getting that first count done, and that's something that just has to get finished, and it has to be done well. But it's been done under very challenging circumstances.
Right, indeed. So it seems like one of the major problems that has come up is that rules were changed in the middle of an election process. Is there something we should be doing differently now to prevent this from happening again in the future? I guess, the rules around late ballots and that kind of thing, but what can you tell us about that?
Well, I think this is sort of speaks to two things. One is that we don't necessarily prepare for really unexpected things. And even things that can be somewhat expected, but we certainly don't hope to happen, like having a pandemic where it's really dangerous for having poll workers to do what they usually do, and so on, and the greater concern people have of going to stand in line and things. I think that in general, we could invest more in our election infrastructure. We could do more to get out best practices and standards. We could share information ways. But I think that this year's been a good example of a lot of good stuff happening under duress. And in some ways, what we're seeing is a much cleaner process than I think a lot of people thought might be possible just a couple of months ago.
Rob, I mean, there is, changing the rules after the race starts is tough. I mean, I ran for office 3 times. I wouldn't like the rules being changed, and I administered a bunch of elections as Secretary of State. I wouldn't like those changes at all. And I'm still a voter, and I wouldn't like that either. But yeah, one of the things that happened is these states and localities had to adapt. So Kentucky, where I still live, we didn't have very much vote by mail or even in-person early voting. You had to have an excuse to vote in advance of Election Day. So our Republican Secretary of State and our Democratic governor, using a law that I helped to get passed back when I was secretary, were able to put these rules into place. So we had a really smooth election. Pennsylvania didn't have a law like that on the books. Everybody knew it was a battleground state, which made the lawmaking process more challenging. And so they didn't get everything figured out and didn't get everything changed. And so, yeah, I think Cindy, to go to your question of how do we make sure we don't have to change these rules is, in between elections, let's make sure we have clear laws. We're borrowing best practices from other states, and so that the next time there's an election, 2 years and 4 years, we're in a better spot. But yeah, I agree with Rob. We are in such a better spot today than I would have thought several months ago. And if you think back to the challenges we had in the primary, where this pandemic starts, like the date, Ohio has to cancel an election like at midnight right before, and Georgia had so many poll workers not show up with huge lines. So think about that. Thank goodness we're not dealing with those right now. We have real situations right now. We have challenges and there's questions. And again, there's a time for all that. But this was a great election relative to what we could have been. And my hat's off to everybody involved in that process. Lawmakers, election officials, poll workers who volunteered, members of the media who are covering it really well. It's actually a good moment for America if we can just get through these next couple of days and figure out who wins.
Absolutely. I think I feel like most Americans don't realize, and maybe they have a better sense now than they did a week ago, about how varied and complex the whole process is. I mean, with every state and county with different rules about, how you vote, how you calculate votes, how you collect the vote, all of that. Maybe you can give us a sense of what you've seen across the country, just to, inform Americans. Rob, why don't you start? Inform Americans. What is this? Why is it so varied, and what are the scope of the variations?
Well, it sort of starts with the fact that the United States has a very long history of running elections, going back to the 1700s. And when we started, there was there wasn't uniformity of a lot of things that we might anticipate having uniformity today. Even the right to vote, right, was really very different in different states. We've never had a national election for anything, right? So it's always been confined to within states. And a lot of the practices that developed were started locally, and then there might be some state coherence, and then every now and then some national laws that establish a certain kind of coherence. But really, so within that space, there can be variation. And, we have more than 10,000 jurisdictions that can make decisions that affect voting for president. And they're not completely independent of everyone else, but they can do, a lot of things about polling locations and voting equipment and poll worker hiring and so on. There are also there are different ways to actually vote itself. Like we're a supporter of the idea of a ranked choice ballot, which is a way of kind of increasingly used way where voters get to rank candidates. They get to say who their first choice is and then their backup second and third choice. And in Maine, they use that for the presidential election. Turns out that the candidates won more than 50%, so that it didn't kick in. But some of these really close states say you're seeing the outcome being won with less than 50%. And if that was Maine, then they'd be using ranked choice voting. Sort of the different kinds of examples that you see, but there's really a lot of variation.
Yeah, I think, there are a couple trends, though, that are happening. Rob's absolutely right. There's a ton of variation. States do it differently. But, one trend is, and it was accelerated this year, is the number of people who vote in advance of Election Day. That's a bipartisan trend led by states out west that are almost exclusively, I'll use the term vote by mail. A lot of the people don't actually put it back in the mail. They use drop boxes, but they don't have many votes cast on Election Day. Arizona and Nevada are two of those states. Nevada this year moved to that because of the pandemic. Arizona moved in that direction a few years ago, and they're almost exclusively, a vote in advance of Election Day kind of state. States in the Midwest and the South and the Northeast have tended to be more traditional excuse-based systems. Going back to the Civil War, that was the first time we had absentee balloting. You had all these soldiers in the Union fighting the war, and President Lincoln knew he needed their votes to get reelected. So all of a sudden, absentee balloting was created. So that's one trend. We are seeing slightly greater role of the federal government stepping in to put in kind of basically minimums. There's voting system standards, there's rules on voter registration lists. You can't discriminate, things like that. And over time, we're seeing a little bit more of a role in that. But it really wasn't until the Voting Rights Act in the mid-'60s that you saw a big federal role. And since then, we've seen steps up to help protect military and overseas voters and voter registration lists, as I mentioned. And now more talk about election security and a little bit of money. But every state does it a little bit different. They'll tell you it's the best system. Each state has that state pride. There's actually an index where you can try to measure and see what you think. But more states are also voting on paper. That's another trend going back over the last couple of decades, which is a good thing in my book as well. So there's some commonalities. And what's nice about all the federalism we see is you can borrow good ideas from other states. You can also see what another state do something and say, nope, I don't want to do that. I'm going to learn from their mistake, and I'm not going to make that same mistake. So it's just like anything else with federalism. There's some advantages to this kind of system. And some would say there's also some disadvantages too, that lack of uniformity, things like that.
So is there any specific reforms that you think would be helpful to see more across the board?
So one is, if you're going to have a lot of absentee ballots, you need to be able to process them early, like a lot of states. That would be my recommendation to Pennsylvania. I tried to get them. I'm a Republican, and I wrote a letter to some of the Republican leaders in the legislature. It didn't get done. It got caught up, some in partisan politics, some in President Trump's messaging against vote by mail, and there were some other issues that kind of just got bogged down. It's tough to make legislative changes in a pandemic in a battleground state. But I'm a big supporter of voter registration reform. I think we can use technology so that our lists can be more accurate. We can maintain those lists more cheaply. Better connections to the driver's license lists. You get the best of both worlds. You get more people registered with the correct information, and you save money and more secure. That's called AVR in the election world. But it's basically kind of like motor voter, but using modern technology. So that's one. And I do like early voting. I like early in-person voting. I think the way we live, people travel around a lot, and I like that in-person. You still get a little bit of election day experience. I might be old-fashioned that way, but you can excel. You can do it in person on weekends. That seems like a good balance between our traditional vote on the Tuesday and reflecting the way we live. So have me back on, Cindy. I can go on and on and on about reforms, but I'll stop there.
Okay, great. And if you vote in person, at least you get your sticker, right?
You get your sticker, right? Yeah, I voted by mail this year, and I didn't get a sticker. It really bummed me out.
and Rob, what's on the top of your list in terms of reforms you'd like to see?
Well, sticker reform is very important, but I actually had 4 stickers to choose from, so we really go all out in Maryland. But I think that Trey really covered key topics there. Voter registration is one where I think we can keep getting better. I mean, I have 3 kids in my 20s. They're mobile, and it's so easy to end. I mean, they've been living in different states, and it's so easy to end up in the roles in different states, and so interstate communication if we don't come with a more coherent national system. But here we are in the 21st century. I think we can figure out a way where every eligible voter is registered and no ineligible voter is registered. Let's just strive for that goal. It sounds easier than it is, but I think it's something that we could achieve. And certainly I think that would go a long way to kind of reassure people to have confidence in the system. I think I'll put on the table, that this is an election where it is feeling really close because of the way we have the electoral college system. And, but when the total votes are counted, knowing that they don't matter for the purposes of anything more than sort of a symbolic fact, but the margin will probably be 5 or 6 million votes. And I think that the current system does put a lot of stress on, or potential stress on making an election that actually isn't that close feel really close, because it's close in 2 or 3 states that might swing the election. So there's a state-based plan called the National Popular Vote Plan, which is something that we think is a worthy proposal, and it just actually was passed on the ballot this year in Colorado and is law in 15 states. And I think that's a conversation that we're going to keep having.
All right, very interesting. Thank you both for joining us, and I'd love to see you both again. All right, and coming up after the break, we take a look at the House and Senate races. But first, here's America Q&A.
So we're waiting for the key states, to come in with their votes.
So far, it's going better than I expected. As far as, it's different this year than previous years as far as this mail-in and all the coronaviruses is going on.
I'm just waiting for the finals because I don't want to cause any undue stress in my life.
Well, it's not over. We have to wait till all the votes are counted. That's what's legal and that's what's necessary.
I think that it's a real toss-up, and I think that it's going to be, we may know in a few days, but I think there's also going to be litigation.
My approach is not to think about the election results so far. It just stresses me. And so I'm waiting to see how things play out over time.
I'm not really happy. It's not over yet. I think there's a lot that's going to have to get sorted out over time.
Just waiting for them to come in. I know there's still a lot of states that are kind of up in the air.
So while the presidency certainly still hangs in the balance, we can say that the Republicans exceeded all expectations, well, at least the expectations of the pollsters, and there's a lot to be said about that on another day. But the Democrats have to be disappointed with their results overall in the House and Senate. And that translates to an almost certainly divided government, regardless of who ends up occupying the Oval Office. So we're joined today by congressional correspondent Mark Tapscott and Robin Biro, a Democrat strategist. Welcome back, gentlemen.
Thank you. Good to be with you, Cindy.
All right. Well, here we are again. Things keep changing every time we see each other.
The never-ending election.
Exactly. Day 3 of the election.
Yes.
So, yeah, as I said in the intro, certainly the Republicans have overperformed the expectations. Maybe those expectations were off, but certainly they overperformed. And the Democrats, they have to be disappointed, with that side of things, whether or not they take the Oval Office. Is that the mood right now, Robin?
Yes, there's no denying that that's the mood. We were really expecting a big blue wave in the House and Senate. We hope to pick up a number of seats in the House, and we really did think that there was a very good chance of flipping the Senate. The votes are still out there, still getting counted. It's just not going to happen in the Senate. And there were some races that we thought for sure that we had. Those polls, we were nervous about the polls, but we didn't think they would be this off again this time. I'm anxious to see those polling metrics and to see what exactly they got wrong in the formulary. But for example, Susan Collins had been down so dramatically in those polls. I had her counted out for dead as a candidate, and here she is and among others. So, but that was one of the biggest shocks to me. And I also hope that people like Jamie Harrison in South Carolina might just possibly pull off a win that was, I know, a long shot, but he was getting there. And
but not a 17-point loss.
No, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that was remarkable. Lindsey Graham just ran away with it.
You know, Cindy, I think one of the most vivid illustrations of how differently things have come out compared to what the experts were telling us was going to happen. You may remember 2 years ago, there was a period there in several months when 6 or 7 Texas Republican congressmen announced that they were not going to run for re-election. And I think the Texas Monthly coined the term to describe this as the Texodus. And of course, this led to all kinds of hopes among Democrats that they were going to be able to turn Texas blue. Well, we look at what happened in Texas. The Republicans did not lose any of those seats, not even the seat that had been held by Will Hurd, which I think pretty much everybody thought was a given for the Democrats to pick up, but they didn't get it. So, you know, this raises some real questions about the validity of our polling and our so-called experts, and I don't exclude myself from that. We need to ask ourselves, why are we getting this wrong?
Yeah, and so wrong. So let's look at the Senate just briefly. It looks like so the Republicans will hold on to a very slim majority there. What do you think is Mitch McConnell, is he going to be able to get the votes he needs? Do you think, how's discipline going to be within that slightly new Senate? What do you think? Sorry, Mark.
I think the most powerful man in the 2021 Senate is going to be Mitt Romney, in some respects, because he really is going to feel his independence now, I suspect, and feel more emboldened about taking off on courses that don't necessarily go along with the typical Republican agenda. Beyond that, I don't think McConnell is going to have a whole lot of problems. Susan Collins is back. She's always been very independent, but you know, the rest of the folks that are coming, it's going to be, I think, a pretty unified bunch.
Even if they're at 51.
Even at 51, maybe even more so if they're at 51.
And I want to hop in there too and remind people that we will have runoffs here in the state of Georgia.
Yeah.
David Perdue just got below the 50% threshold, which triggers an automatic runoff. Of course, there's still probably, I think, 30,000 votes to count, but that's definitely looking like it's going to a runoff. But Mark, to your point about Texas, I too was very surprised because we had so many high hopes set on all of those people that Beto O'Rourke had registered,
exactly.
and the momentum that he had there in Texas, we thought sincerely would translate to this election. And I am actually really surprised that it did not.
If you look at the border counties, for example, I still think one of the biggest stories to come out of the elections in 2020 is the success of Republicans in attracting Hispanic votes. You look at those counties down on the border, Hillary Clinton carried Zapata County, for example, in 2016. She got 65% of the vote. Trump carried it this time around. In Hidalgo County and El Paso County, which are the two biggest of the counties on the border there, Biden actually ran a little bit ahead of Clinton. He got 30,000 more votes than she did, but Trump got 70,000 more. So, and principally coming from, of course, Hispanic voters. So, you know, if the Republicans are able to develop this and expand it, this is going to make for some fundamental changes in the political dynamic.
So, Mark, do you think that is due to, is it just the Hispanic vote or also border policy over the last 4 years?
Well, that's one of the great ironies of this. You'll recall in 2016, you know, the experts, the elites told us that because Trump was so insistent on building that wall, that it would drive away Hispanic voters. And yet here we are. They seem to like what Trump has done. And I suspect that there's going to be some real scratching of heads at the DNC and maybe even at the RNC, who knows, about how that can be. But there it is.
So we chatted briefly the other night about what are the chances of Speaker Pelosi perhaps not being in her role in the next session. Do we have any updates on your thoughts? Everyone laughed it out of a possibility, but what do you gentlemen think right now? Robin, are there any murmurings of a new speaker?
No, not at all. If this were a couple years ago, yes. I didn't think that she was going to get it, honestly, back then, but she's not going anywhere. And we need her right now because we've got to fight. If Biden wins, that we have a fight with confirming all of his appointees because Mitch McConnell just said that he's going to put up a huge fight and a firewall there. Now, what President Trump did when he was elected, and we did that, was that they started naming people acting deputy director and things like that. So, there are ways around that. I see that that's probably what we'll end up having to do because Mitch McConnell's going to put up some firewalls and put up a serious fight when it comes to a lot of these confirmations should Biden win.
Yeah. It's interesting. Anytime I want to know what House Democrats are thinking, I don't ask House Democrats, I ask Politico because they really are well connected there. And one of their reporters, I forget which one today, described the dissatisfaction among House Democrats with the results of the election as, quote, a dumpster fire. I doubt that Nancy Pelosi will have a challenger, but I do think it's very likely that there are going to be some tremendous pressures on her to change her approach. She's going to have to find a way to reach out to some Republicans and become more reasonable about some of this stuff. Or she's going to be losing votes in 2021 that she wouldn't want to be losing.
Do you think that's going to be just a lot easier if Trump is not around, if that's how things go, to reach across the aisle?
I do not. I'll weigh in there. There's this huge partisan divide. I really don't like it at all. I miss the days when we could work together. Now, I have high hopes that Joe Biden, with his long history of working across the aisle, will try to get some of that done. Barack Obama had huge hopes of doing that himself. He tried in 2009 when he was inaugurated. He invited everyone in for multiple soirees, actually, to try and lighten the mood and get some levity in there. But the lines got drawn, and I just don't see that going away at all. But I know that Biden will try, but I just don't know. I think the battle lines aren't going anywhere.
I remember very fondly, as I suspect Robin does as well, Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill used to fight like dogs during the day. And then sit down like a couple of Irishmen with a bottle of, I guess, Irish whiskey, and have a few snorts and tell each other some political jokes. And, there were genuine friendships in Washington then. Those are rare, few and far between today, and that needs to change.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, gentlemen, thank you. Always a pleasure having you both, and hope to see you both again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy.
All right, and coming up after the break, how are the markets responding to this electoral uncertainty? But first, we have America Q&A.
There's too many states that Biden they've already said has won, which I can't believe is true. Talked with a guy just yesterday, and he got 3 absentee ballots delivered to his house with other people's names. So how does that work?
However, I think it was a system that worked a long time ago, and we probably need to rethink it.
Well, I've voted absentee ballot for like several elections in a row, and a vote's a vote. As long as it gets counted, I'm good with that.
We don't trust it too much.
Absolutely.
Not in particular, no.
This part of the election is over. It's been a long time coming, but I'm still willing to wait. I hope they get it right. Getting it right is more important than getting it quickly, in my opinion.
Well, I've been voting absentee ballot for a number of years. I qualify in terms of my age, and I'm also not comfortable standing in line. I think it's great.
5 ballots for 5 members of my family, including myself, that I didn't even request. So I don't know who's requesting them, and I don't know if these ballots are actually being requested by other people and they filling them out and voting for those people or not. Because a young lady had an instance this morning that she was talking about, that because a ballot was sent to her home, she wanted to vote in person, but she had to fill out some type of affidavit or something like that before she was allowed to vote. They said, no, we sent you a mail-in ballot. She never requested it. So why should, she almost didn't vote, but she knew the importance of it. So she went on ahead and did what they asked her to do, so she was allowed to vote. But how many other people has that happened to?
To be honest, I have heard a lot of talk about fraud, but I don't really think it's a big deal.
I think our electoral system is a mess. I think it's much too hard to vote. It's too easy for votes to be suppressed. I think we need to change the process so it's very easy for every American to vote.
Welcome back to the show. Now, normally the markets, they like certainty, and certainty is not what we have in this election. But the markets haven't been reacting unfavorably to that, and here to make sense of it for us is Melissa Armo. She's the founder and CEO of Swoosh. Welcome, Melissa.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Excellent. So, as I said in the intro, normally the markets seem to like stability and certainty, and that's not what we have, but they seem to be going up. So how can you explain that for us?
Well, as we're speaking right now, guess what? The markets are selling off tonight. They're selling off hard tonight. So it's interesting. What my expectation for this week was that if we didn't get an answer by the end of the week as to who won the presidential election, we were going to see volatility. So right after the election, Wednesday, we had a nice rally. And then today, we rallied a little bit. We're losing it. We're losing it tonight. I wouldn't be surprised if we sell off tomorrow. Why? There's going to be some legal battles going on about who's winning. We still don't know who's won. And again, people are feeling really shaky right now about their honesty about the election, because really people are going to say, do we believe what these polls are saying or what the count is? People don't really know.
And how about the international markets? Are we seeing any reactions there?
I haven't checked them yet, but typically when we're down, the international markets are down. But yeah, usually we go together. And I'll say this, with the numbers that we had this morning, we had some really good numbers out this morning. Unemployment was undercut, less than expected. So we're under the 8% number. We had the jobless claims come in. Again, they're decreasing week over week. So we've had some good numbers lately. Last week, we had a good GDP number. Right. We've had some good economic data, but the backdrop of COVID, the cases increasing for COVID, the uncertainty of the presidential outcome, I think is going to weigh on the market. But to be honest with you, I was surprised that we had the rally we did the last 2 days. I think that people thought Biden was a sure winner and that the news media outlets were calling him to win, or we would know by Wednesday night. But when that didn't happen, and here we are going into the end of the week, this is going to go into next week. This could drag on for another month. And that, with increase in COVID, I don't think the market's going to get over the high. I don't think we're going to make new highs. We got really close to it today, but we couldn't do it. And that tells me you're going to see some more selling coming into the month of November.
I see. And how about this? It seems like a Biden presidency is probably going to favor being more cautious when it comes to COVID instead of, opening up. So maybe more stimulus, more cautious economically. If it's a Trump presidency, it's going to be about opening the economy, getting back to work. What is the market looking for there? What is the market like there between the two?
Well, the market has liked Trump's strategy for the economy. So if Trump would, in fact, win re-election, I think the market would see a rally. If Biden wins, although I think the market's going to hold the uptrend, I don't think the rally is going to be as steep as it would if Trump would win, because Biden has already said that he would listen to the experts, like Dr. Fauci, for example. And if they say that they would shut the country down again, then I think that Biden said already that he would listen to them. He said that on ABC News in an interview with Dave Ramir. And I think the problem is that some of these businesses, number one, they're still not open. They're still not up to capacity. You don't have cruise lines, airlines, hospitality, restaurants here in New York City are only at 25% capacity for indoors. So many of these businesses can't go back to being completely shut down again when they never really completely opened. So I don't think that a Biden presidency would help the economy if, in fact, he decides to shut it down. Now, if Biden wins and they don't shut down the economy, then maybe we can move forward. either way, no matter who wins, no matter what the outcome is, the market wants to see a stimulus package. People are hurting, people are unemployed, and I think they need to do another round of the PPP to help some of these businesses. The airlines aren't going to make it to the end of the year without more layoffs. They already announced that. They already said they're going to have more layoffs if they don't see more stimulus and help from the government by the end of 2020.
And what's expected for holiday spending? Can that help anything at all, or is it expected to be sort of record lows?
Well, as far as holiday spending goes, remember, people spend more when they go out into the stores or the brick and mortar, which people aren't going to do this year because they're afraid of COVID. And here in New York City right now, like I was on Fifth Avenue today, it's wall to wall boarded up. And that's because people are still afraid of riots with the election outcome, which is pending. It's not fun to go into a store when it's boarded up. They've been boarded up for a week. They've been boarded up on and off since June because of riots. People are afraid of COVID. People are afraid of riots and protests. So I think online shopping, you have the Cyber Monday, the Cyber Week. I think that possibly could be the big shopping day of the year. But right now, I'm already getting emails for Black Friday sales. So retail stores are trying to get as many sales in as they can, even a month before the holidays. But I think people are still going to be scared to go out unless for some reason we get a vaccine before Thanksgiving. And that could happen. I think that's a stretch, but they're talking about the possibility of another month maybe.
Yeah, I mean, even if one comes out before Thanksgiving, the distribution of it's going to,
Exactly.
take some time. Right. The clock's running out on that one. And so what's your advice for investors at this stage?
I would say for active traders, like I teach people how to actively trade the market, we're going to see a lot of volatility, which makes for great opportunity if you know how to play it, which you could short, you could go long. For long-term investors, depending on your time horizon, if you're in the market, say you're worried about your 401k if we sell off again, if you've got a long time horizon to be in the market, I would let it ride because the market probably is going to hold the uptrend even if we have a sell-off here. But if you are in retirement or if you need to take the funds out of your retirement soon, like I'd say next 12 months, you may want to take some profits here because the market has been close to the highs. Some of these tech stocks have had nice rallies. I don't know if we're going to see a Christmas rally this year. November could be a shaky month, back and forth rallying like we did the last 2 days and then selling off, which I think we're going to do tomorrow. I think December is going to really depend on if we know who actually wins the presidential election. I think we got to know by Thanksgiving because if we don't know by the holidays, that's going to create such terrible animosity and panic in the markets. And really almost no matter what numbers come out, whatever economic data comes out, no matter what stimulus happens, well, actually, they're not going to pass a stimulus unless they know what's going to happen with the presidential election.
Right, exactly. All right, yeah. We've got to wrap up here. Thank you so much, Melissa, and we hope to see you back.
Thanks for having me.
So legal challenges have been launched by the Trump campaign in Nevada, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Georgia. A lot has happened since Wednesday morning after the actual formal election, and here to help us make sense of some of what we're seeing is Hans von Spakovsky. He's an attorney and former member of the Federal Election Commission, and he's now the senior legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation. And attorney Erin Elmore, she's the executive director of USA Strong. Welcome both.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having me.
So Hans, why don't we start with you? Can you give us an update on the current legal situation, the situation of the suits?
Well, the president campaign filed lawsuits, as you said, in a number of states, making different claims. In Michigan and Pennsylvania, for example, they complained about the fact that qualified observers, and every state has laws allowing candidates to appoint observers or poll watchers to watch every aspect of the election process, were being barred and kept out of the areas where the counting of ballots was going on. Apparently in Pennsylvania, they actually obtained a state court judge's order telling election officials they had to allow observers in. But apparently at a press conference, the Trump campaign said that election officials there were not complying with that order. They're also intervening in a case that had already gone to the Supreme Court once, in which they're complaining about the fact that the state Supreme Court in Pennsylvania, among other things, extended the deadline for the receipt of absentee ballots that was set by state law to several days after the election, and they are contesting that, saying that while the state legislature constitutionally could change that date, the state courts don't have the authority to do that. That's just one of a number of lawsuits that they have filed in different states.
And so I want to know, Erin, maybe you can tell us, even if these lawsuits, okay, so in terms of observing, you know, the polling places and any of these lawsuits, what would be could they actually invalidate the results from a state, or what could the Trump campaign hope to actually gain from these?
It depends on the nature of the allegations and the state, for example. But on several occasions here, we're looking at perhaps more people that were registered to vote than were in the county, and all kinds of strange numbers that aren't really adding up, where some ballots counted twice. So I think it's going to be reevaluating each ballot, unfortunately, because as we saw in the middle of the night in several states, ballots were only showing up for Joe Biden and none for President Trump, and it just seemed quite peculiar. And there was differences in what the machines were showing, and they said those numbers were rectified, yet the numbers weren't going up for President Trump. So I think it's going to be really taking a look state by state at these numbers and ascertaining, do these votes make sense? Are they legally legitimate? And by the way, if Joe Biden knew or thought that he knew that he won this election fair and square, what is wrong with transparency? I think we should have total transparency. It will give us faith in the process and faith in the president.
But won't this take a really long time if they have to go back to, you know, county level and look at every ballot potentially and how things, won't that take a very long time and generally undermine faith in the system and cause a lot of other problems down the road? Sure, Hans.
Yeah, the president's legal team faces two big problems. The first problem is, as prior courts have said, is it's extremely tough to gather enough evidence of possible misconduct, possible fraud, or errors made in election contests that are enough to compromise the result in the very short time period you have to contest an election after it has occurred. And the second problem they have is even when you can put that kind of evidence together, courts unfortunately are extremely reluctant to overturn elections, even when there is substantial evidence of possible wrongdoing that, as I said, compromise the election. That's just generally true with this kind of litigation after an election has occurred, and that's an uphill battle for the Trump campaign.
Do you see it that way too, Erin?
I really don't see it that way. I see making sure that people that are deceased shouldn't vote in elections. People's dogs shouldn't vote in elections. And I think these things need to be cross-referenced because we need full and fair and free elections in this country. This is undermining the integrity of our whole entire nation and what we stand for as a democracy. And by the way, you only get to vote for socialism and communism once. This could be our last election if that's what's on the ballot and that's a referendum here. So I think that these votes need to be analyzed. We need to take a deeper look at what's going on. We know that on election night, Arizona was called very early for Joe Biden, and now we're seeing that it's completely back in play because several ballots were filled out with Sharpie markers as opposed to pens. And until they were pressed on the issue, they just weren't counting those. No, you have to hand count those ballots. So there are different issues on different states and so many things that need to be evaluated and looked at. It's not just about, is there wrongdoing? It's how is this being handled? Which votes are being counted? Are they in the right envelopes? Are they mailed out twice? Were people's votes counted more than once? All of those issues are very complex, very specific, very different state by state, and they all need to be looked at. It's also sort of, the Democrats pushed really hard for these mail-in ballots, and now to them I say, you are reaping what you sow, be careful what you wish for.
Well, look, I just got to say, look, I agree with all of that. And I, in fact, totally agree that all of this ought to be looked at. But what I'm saying is that because of the way courts treat these kind of issues when they're raised by candidates, it's just tough to put together a case in the short amount of time you usually have to contest an election result. And that's just a hard thing for the Trump campaign to overcome. I hope they can do it, And they ought to do it if, in fact, there's actual evidence of the kind of problems we have seen, particularly not allowing observers in to see the process. Right. You have to wonder, why were election officials doing that in Detroit and Philadelphia? What were they trying to hide? What was going on there? I'm just saying, unfortunately, legally, it can be a very tough case to make.
Because
oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go right ahead, Erin.
What I was going to say is we're not at the point yet where we're contesting the outcome of the election. We're just trying to make sure that the ballots are counted properly and in a fair way. We are, luckily, so far for the president, we are not at the point of waving that white flag and trying to overturn the results, because right now there is still a path to victory for President Trump if we're still looking into possibly Nevada and Arizona. I know there were several issues in Wisconsin and Michigan as well. So there are several, there is a path to victory for the president right now. So we're not at the point of saying we are trying to overturn the results of this election. We are just trying to ascertain whether or not every vote was counted properly.
So it seems like there's going to be, if there's a lot of very different scenarios that have happened in different states and different counties and different polling places, is there even a way to kind of pull that all together and say, and this shows a picture of fraud and, this was an illegitimate election? Like what happens at that point, or what's the outcome that could give, President Trump the wins in those states?
Well, it's a state by state battle. We don't really have a national election. What we have are elections in each of the states. And if you're going to contest the outcome, you can't really do it on a national basis. You have to contest the results in each state. So in each state, you've got to have enough people on the ground and enough lawyers to investigate, gather evidence, look at what is being done and how it's being done by election officials, whether all of the laws were complied with that, for example, apply to absentee ballots. And you have to fight the battle in each state. And that, again, look, it should be done, but that's a very hard job, and it takes a lot of people and a lot of resources to do that.
Right. So then I guess the legal question before a court is going to be, even if the poll observers weren't allowed in, even if there are these irregularities here or there, is it enough to say that overall there is illegitimacy in the process, or enough ballots were miscounted or, wrongly counted or whatever it is, to rule what? To rule that it's an invalid election? What would have to happen?
It's a total state by state scenario and an issue by issue
scenario. But even at one
scenario.
state, even in one state, because different things were happening at different polling places, even in a single state.
So then you're talking about a polling place issue. So that's not the only issue at play here. We're saying ballot counting issues, the issues. This is literally the worst possible case scenario you could have ever imagined for any sort of election,
absolutely.
In my personal opinion. This is literally the worst case scenario.
Oh, I think your Skype's a bit spotty there. Is that happening for you too, Hans?
Yeah, I'm not able to hear her.
Okay, yeah, I think we lost her. Okay, well, I have a question for you. Can we get Hans back? I have a question for you. Do you think that what would happen now? So December 12th is a deadline for the electors to meet. What happens if we don't have results in some states before then?
Well, that's a tough problem because that's when the electors are supposed to meet in their state capitals and cast their votes for president. And I think what would happen if we have litigation, and this emphasizes what I said before, there's only a very short time for a candidate to contest election results. Look, the courts, I think, would look at this extremely quickly. What usually may take months or years in a normal case would just take days. I think we would get a very quick decision at the trial court level in any kind of contesting of the election. You would then see emergency appeals to the courts of appeal, and then you might see an emergency appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. All of that, I think, would happen very quickly. Remember, the Bush v. Gore decision in 2000, it happened just in time so that the electors could meet and cast their votes for president. I think we would see a very similar process here if the results are litigated.
Well, and that's probably because Al Gore stepped in also and conceded at that point. He could have kept pushing things, I think, also. Well, I guess the Supreme Court made its decision on the dangling chads in Florida.
Yeah. Once the Supreme Court made its decision, it didn't matter what Al Gore wanted to do or not do.
So, Erin, we lost you in the middle of your last
sorry
point.
about that.
No problem. Do you recall what you were saying?
I'm not exactly sure, but just to finish up on your point there, we had the Bush v. Gore in Florida. That was one state. The hanging chads are a picnic compared to what we're looking at right now. We have so much litigation that's going to possibly occur here in myriad of states with spanning so many issues that this could be a really long, arduous process that will not be resolved anytime soon. I mean, we do have the January deadlines, of course, but the issues here are just so many, and the pressure is really mounting to sort of come to some sort of legal conclusion. And unfortunately, it's going to be state by state and issue by issue, and the decision-making process is going to be difficult.
Right, and the president indicated today that, there's going to be a lot more litigation. He indicated on election night that he's expecting it to go to the Supreme Court. How long do you two expect that process to take for it to get up to the Supreme Court level? How quickly could it get to the Supreme Court? Any idea, Erin?
I mean, it would have to be expedited just because the time crunch that we are under. And we do know that if the Supreme Court does not have to take any cases. They have the ability to not hear a case. So that is also an option. But we do know if the Supreme Court does choose to hear a case, the balance of power has changed with Justice Amy Coney Barrett. So we do know that it will probably go in the president's favor, but the Supreme Court is no way obligated to take this case, or any case for that matter.
And Hans, as a very last thought, do you see that playing out in a different way?
No, I think it potentially will go to the Supreme Court if the president's legal advisors are willing to pursue it that far, if they get bad decisions in the lower courts. Like I said, though, I do think the courts will make every effort to expedite hearing the cases and making decisions on any appeals, because they're all well aware of the December 12th date that the Electoral College has to meet. And I think if it's at all possible, they'll try to get a final decision made by then.
All right. Well, it sounds like we're in for a bit of a rough ride. Thank you both for joining us tonight.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for having me. Buckle up.
Indeed.